would be so touched by all of you being here, and we certainly are too. I am Debbie, Eve's oldest. We have a lot of sharing and memories and music in our time here together that we're here to remember Eve. To start out with, Eve's sister Rainey is going to play a piece on the cello. It's called Prayer by Block. She's going to start, and then we're going to go from there. Thank you. Thank you so much, Rainey. Our family would like to thank each of you for sharing this time with us. Some came a great distance, and we are very grateful. Please sign our guest book and write down a memory or two for us to keep on the paper that's out there. We also have quite a few items of Eve's that we'd love for you to take a look at on both sides of the back of the theater. After our memorial, we will visit right out by the north door of the lobby, and we'll have locally farm fresh food by Seed's Kitchen. So we hope you can enjoy that with us. And then after that, for any of you that are able to, between 4:30 and 5:30, we would love to have you come to Eve's house. Her address is on your program there. And we have all of her plentiful art displayed, hundreds of pieces, and we'd love for you to take some of those as a remembrance of Eve, as well as any of her many, many books. And whatever's left, I'm not sure what we're going to do with, so we'd love for you to have those. And if you can't come by afterwards, please let me know, and I'll make sure that you can get some if you'd like. We have so many thanks to express. And this is by no means complete, but I do want to mention a few. First and foremost to Jackie, who in her 25 years of treatment with Eve was life-giving to her. Very grateful to all of Eve's doctors and medical professionals who provided excellent and compassionate care. To her caregivers who lovingly took care of every need that she had and more. To Eve's friends and neighbors, to Kathy Newsom, who is continuing the loving care and home that Eve gave her beloved animals, and Kathy brought beloved Finn here with her today. I'd like to thank Tom Logan, who calls himself a handyman, but he is so much more. He's always willing to come and help. He came to Eve's at any time to help with all kinds of home emergencies and repairs. He's now been helping me for the last 5 weeks, and I couldn't have done any of this without him. I would like to thank the Boulder Public Library, who made this place, beautiful place, possible. It's such a perfect setting for Eve's gathering with her love of books and being the voracious reader that she was. We just wish that she would have come here to borrow books more often instead of have the thousands that are in her house. The beautiful Tree of Life exhibit, which is out there temporarily, I just couldn't believe it when I walked in here to plan this. It's just so fitting for Eve. To our person in charge here, Joel Hartling, who's around here somewhere, and as we talked to get this set up, we realized that we grew up just a few blocks away from each other here in Boulder. Both went to Boulder High. I'm definitely older than Joel. His mother also taught music lessons in Boulder at the same time as Eve. So we had some very special connections. Thank you to the JFS and the Holocaust Grant for all of their support. Also to the new Boulder Friends Middle School, who will continue to create with Eve's vast amount of art supplies. To my friend Marilyn McShane, who directly got many of Eve's linens, blankets, towels, clothes, warm hats and gloves, kitchen items, books, and more to area, homeless, and other community groups. And to those who have helped and sustained me, I am very grateful. We're going to start right now. Ruth Siegel, if you can come on up, Ruth. Ruth was a good friend of Eve's, and Ruth is also an incredible scholar. Ruth is going to share a reading in both Hebrew and in English.
I'm going to read in English a traditional prayer for the soul of the beloved person. And then I will chant it in Hebrew. God, filled with mercy, dwelling in the heavens' heights, bring proper rest beneath the wings of your Shekhinah, amid the ranks of the holy and the pure, illuminating like the brilliance of the skies the soul of our beloved Eve, who went to her eternal place of rest. May you, who are the source of mercy, shelter her beneath your wings eternally, and bind her soul among the living, that she may rest in peace and we will say Amen. El male rachamim, shochen במרומים, המצא מנוחה נכונה, תחת כנפי השכינה עם קדושים וטהורים כזוהר, כי המזהירים לנשמת איבת שלום שהלכה לעולמה, אנא בעל הרחמים, הסתיריה בצל כנפיך לעולמים, וצרו בצרור החיים את נשמתה. אדוני הוא נחלתה ותנוח בשלום על משכבה. ונאמר אמן, ונאמר אמן.
Thank you so much, Ruth. That was beautiful. Right now, what we're going to do is show the video that we had for Eve's 85th birthday. So 2.5 years ago, made this for her. And we thought it would be appropriate to share that with you today.
What to find them can ever be found. But the sun rolling high through the sapphire sky keeps great and small on the endless round. It's the circle of life, and it moves the soul through despair and hope, through faith and love, till we find our place for the path
Now we're going to have Jim Eston come up. Jim and his family have been longtime family friends. His family welcomed ours to Boulder when we moved here in 1961. Jim's father, Art Eston, who's here with us today, was our father Sid's childhood friend in New Jersey, and Art spoke at our father's memorial 2 years ago. So we're so honored to have Jim share a few words about Eve with us today.
So I met Eve in 1961 when she was less than half as old as I am now. I was a skinny 7-year-old boy. The Geltmans had moved to Boulder, and childhood connections between my father, Art, and Sid led our families to come together the very summer that you guys arrived. Over the next, half a century, I have had not one, but many different relationships with Eve. Sometimes it's hard to recall specific memories, although as I have thought about her over the past month, visual images have come surprisingly clearly to me. More importantly, the tone is what I recall. Is that better? Thanks. There. The photographs make me remember the instantaneous warmth of Eve's smile. I think I remember Rachel and Debbie the first time we met at a summer picnic on a table in the carport of our house on Topaz Drive. The excitement of meeting two girls led me to have no memory of you, Seth. My apologies. The Geltmans formed part of the social network of my family throughout the 1960s. Concerts, holiday meals with the Mandels, and so forth were the weft of the weave of those childhood years for me. Eve was also a particular friend of my mother's. I know they had lunch with some regularity, would attend concerts and talk on the phone with frequency and fondness. In many ways, Boulder was much smaller and the community was very tight. I remember regular visits each summer from the Geltmans when we would pick ripe corn from our garden in rural Boulder to send home with the Geltmans in their urban home. By late elementary school, Eve became my violin teacher, and she continued throughout most of my childhood. Her studio in the basement was a different world from the after-school world of the Geltman kids upstairs. Neighbors would hang out in the kitchen, a tempting distraction from the rigor of my anticipated lesson. As a teacher, Eve used many analogies, stories, metaphors, and rituals to promote good violin play. She filled that stenography notebook where she would enumerate in pencil the plan for my practice over the next week. Graciously generous, she rarely forced a full confrontation around my fidelity to that practice plan. But on occasion, she would tightly titrate the expectations she had for practicing, particularly unpleasant and difficult exercises. Recitals and group playing were an expected and essential part of her teaching. I think I can't really emphasize that enough. I think Eve's ideas about teaching violin and playing include that it's necessary to perform and it's necessary to play with others. In 1965, I was hospitalized for an operation. My violin, which was originally my grandfather's, was in desperate need of a case. Eve organized an incredibly generous gift for me in the hospital of a new case filled with delightful boxes of small European toys and games to help me in my recovery. From that music store on Broadway, the name of which I can't remember, and somebody here surely, I thought it was Nelson's. It's Nelson's, okay. I was not a stellar student, but playing violin was important to me. Eve was my musical mentor, even after I stopped lessons in high school. I would play with her in an orchestra, and she offered me wise and sensible musical advice. One bit that I will always recall is that she talked about the importance of sight reading music and of playing in groups. You won't necessarily practice much when you are an adult, but for violin to be a pleasure for you, you need sight reading skills in order to play chamber music, which after all is what you are likely to play. We talked yearly when I was home from college, where I continued to play in orchestras and in my first working years. By this time, Eve was truly my friend. In my young adult years after graduate school, I moved back to Colorado. She offered quiet and thoughtful comfort after my mother died. She understood loss in her own way. What I recall most is not what she said, but her warmth, her quiet and comforting presence. Eve made references to some of her own struggles. I would see her periodically in Boulder when I lived here with my own young family. I remember the cold day of my daughter's bat mitzvah when Eve was one of the first people to greet me after the service. We hugged and she shook my hand. It was really warm. I asked her how she could keep her hand so warm. She replied that she had learned to meditate, and it was just one of the ways that she could have greater control of things like her body temperature. That really impressed me. For Eve, her life, her work, her family, and her relationships were all intensely personal. I think as she grew older, they were less private, but still intensely personal. In the years since 1999, I've lived in Iowa City, and I would drop by to see her after she moved into her new house. It was clear how she had her own search for personal meaning and artistic exploration. I know that Eve expanded her creative expression to include many other musical instruments, to writing, and to art. She meditated, she gardened, she landscape gardened, she explored a religious and spiritual life. She had her own adult bat mitzvah, which was clearly a mark of a new phase in her life. She understood and told me of part of her past that included painful difficulties, including seeing herself as a European Jewish refugee. She was interested in exploring both her personal and her spiritual understanding of who she was in her life. I remember her reflecting about the ways that when she was 69, she felt herself to be not getting older, but entering a new and more vital period of her life. Eve Bat Shalom was a person who knew about learning and about growth. She lived her life seeking to discover more about herself and share that understanding with others through creativity, generosity, kindness, and friendship.
Thank you so much, Jim. Right now, we're going to watch just a couple minutes of a video in which Eve performed 10 years ago, actually almost exactly 10 years ago, the spring of 2006. She performed for the Intergenerational Idol. The group, in fact, I think I saw Linda Holloway here. Bessie's Hope and Rainbow Bridge, they are different names for the same organization that enhances the lives of those who live in nursing homes. And they had a performance 10 years ago called Intergenerational Idols, where they had young people perform and elders perform. And Eve was one of the elders who performed. So we're just going to watch the first couple of minutes, just so that you have a feeling of Eve right here with us, as she is anyway. So David's going to get that set up for us.
Eva Bat Shalom is both an accomplished pianist and violinist. She's been playing for 7 decades on the violin and has played at the piano till the age of 69. Then she decided to get serious about it. She started studying, practicing, 2 to 3 hours a day. Tonight, we have the privilege of hearing her play the violin. She is accompanied by Emily Wong. Ladies and gentlemen, Eve Bat Shalom.
I just want to read the first 4 lines of Elizabeth Barrett Browning's because it reminds me so much of what this piece feels like. How do I love thee? Let me count the ways. I love thee to the depth and breadth and height my soul can reach, when feeling out of sight for the ends of being in ideal grace.
Rachel's husband, Marty Seuss, is now going to share a few words and do a reading.
Before I begin my piece, I just wanted to read something my daughter, Gabby, had sent that she wanted me to read. Dad, please tell everyone that I'm very sorry I couldn't make it. And miss and love everyone. Omi was a very strong woman and never afraid to express herself. I totally respect her for that, and hopefully I can follow her steps one day. Rest in peace, Omi. We love you and miss you very much. I wanted to honor Eve by reading a piece from the Old Testament for a number of reasons, to honor her deep spirituality, her love for the Bible. I actually think once she said something about she wanted to rewrite the Bible or something like that. It was classic Eve. Her love for words and her love for books. So I've selected a section from the Old Testament, from Ecclesiastes chapter 3. The first part of it you've probably heard. The second part, maybe not so much, but I think it's a very good reflection of Eve and kind of helps me formulate my thoughts and what I want to say today. A time for everything. For everything there is a season, a time for every activity under heaven. A time to be born and a time to die. A time to plant and a time to harvest. A time to kill and a time to heal. A time to tear down and a time to build up. A time to cry and a time to laugh. A time to grieve and a time to dance. A time to scatter stones and a time to gather stones. A time to embrace and a time to turn away. A time to search and a time to quit searching. A time to keep and a time to throw away. A time to tear and a time to mend. A time to be quiet and a time to speak. A time to love and a time to hate. A time for war and a time for peace. What do people really get for all their hard work? I have seen the burden God has placed on all of us. Yet God has made everything beautiful for its own time. He has planted eternity in the human heart. But even so, people cannot see the whole scope of God's work from beginning to end. So I concluded there is nothing better than to be happy and to enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are the gifts of God. And I see Eve through so much of this reading. I see her struggles, I see the highs and the lows, the challenges and the achievements, I see the positives and the negatives. And trying to sum it up, I thought, what's one word? Eve loved words, and she was so good at words. What would be one word to really sum up her life and how I knew her? That's tough, because there are so many words you could use to describe Eve, and I really forced myself to come up with one. And the one word I chose was indefatigable. Indefatigable. I love the way that word sounds. It has a quirky sound to it, doesn't it? Indefatigable. It's quirky. It's kind of like Eve. Eve was quirky. I loved her to death, but she was quirky. But boy, was she indefatigable. The dictionary, and unfortunately I didn't go on Merriam-Webster's, I went online, says indefatigable means incapable of being tired, not yielding to fatigue, untiring. Gosh, boy, that sounds like Eve, even up to the very end as I understand it. There are three 3 lines in this passage I want to go back and reflect on very briefly. I have seen the burden God has placed on all of us. And boy, God placed a lot of burdens on Eve. And we saw those burdens if we cared to look in her paintings, in her writing. We saw those burdens in her insatiable quest and reading and quest for truth. We saw those burdens in her personal search for self-enlightenment and self-awareness through her hard work with her therapist, Jackie. So I concluded there's nothing better than to be happy and enjoy ourselves as long as we can. And boy, Eve was a happy person driven by so many passions, you know, her art, her music, which we saw so beautifully today, her writing, her passion for her children, her grandkids, her family, her passion for food. She loved food, and her passion for Boulder and the great community here that she so revered. I remember so often when she would come to New York, back to the indefatigable and her passion, we really had to store up energy because Eve would take New York by storm. There weren't enough museums. They weren't open long enough. There weren't enough concerts to go see. There weren't enough restaurants to go see. There weren't enough sights to see in Manhattan. She was passionate and she was indefatigable. And people should eat and drink and enjoy the fruits of their labor, for these are gifts from God. Eve was a gift from God. So I'd just like to end with a short prayer. Eternal rest granted to her, O Lord, and may perpetual light shine on her soul, and may her soul and all the souls of the faithfully departed, through the mercy of God, rest in peace. Amen.
And now we're going to have 4 very special people come up here. We had a number of caregivers for Eve over the last year and a half. And the 4 who probably spent the most time with her were Sue, Jean, Tina, and Kathy. The word caregiver does not begin to describe all that they meant to Eve and to us. They loved Eve. They cared for her in every single possible way. They went above and beyond. And they have my extreme gratitude always. So I would like the 4 of you to come up and share a little bit about Eve. Thank you.
I'm really grateful to have, oops, let me move this up a bit because I'm a bit tall. Grateful to have the opportunity to say a few words about Eve. I find it really difficult to believe that Eve was only in my life for about 2.5 to 3 years, because it feels like I've always known her, and it feels like she has always been in my life. So it's extraordinary to me that it's only 3 years. Her kindness, her gentleness, her joy, all these things were just so absolutely amazing. And when I first met her, she was moving into a stage in life where she talked a great deal about elderling. Elderling was a word for her. I think she probably coined it, the idea of getting older and of really kind of just marinating in age and feeling the wisdom and going with it. And she taught me so much about that. And it was an amazing time with her to hear her speak about those things. In the Jewish tradition, there is the idea that we could try and say in a day 100 blessings at least. And in my mind, that's really just to realize that each day is a miracle, and just waking up and just being and just seeing the sky, it's all miraculous. And Eve, for me, encompassed that. She, every moment, she sort of she appreciated. And the tiniest things, going for a walk, she loved. She'd notice all the leaves. She'd pick up all these sticks, although we had masses of sticks already in the house. She would sit having her breakfast in the kitchen and look at the mandala that she'd built, and everything she just loved. And she, no moment seemed to be wasted. One of the things she really loved was bookstores, and she and I spent a lot of time in bookstores, and we had some great adventures. And then we'd come back, and in the early days when she was stronger and more active and more alert, we would come back and she would sit down and we would have the most extraordinary conversations. It would start with Egyptian mythology, go on to Jungian philosophy, go on to gardening and food, and just so many topics. And I would, at the end of the afternoon, I would almost always phone Debbie, and I would say, you just wouldn't believe the conversation we had this afternoon. But of course she would, knowing Eve. And it was just extraordinary. My time with her was really a blessing and incredibly special. But I also want to say that I am incredibly thankful and grateful to have been involved with Debbie in the amazing, loving way that she looked after her mother. There were a number of caregivers, and in the beginning it was relatively simple, although not really. By the end, it was, in my mind, a logistic nightmare. And she stayed so calm and loving and kind and patient and sweet and supportive through the entire thing. And to my knowledge, never had a meltdown, which I found extraordinary. Eve is always going to be with me, and in fact, she's nearly always with me when I'm driving, because one of the things we used to do is drive around, and the first few times I nearly died when she did this, but I was driving around and she would suddenly sit bolt upright and say, "Look, look!" And I think, oh my God, I've missed a dog or a cyclist or something terrible is happening. And she would look up at the sky and she'd say, "Do you see that? Can you see that? There's an alligator, or there's a bird, or there's something up there." And I'd pull the car over to the side and get my heart out of my mouth and look up and try and see what she was seeing. And more often than not, I could see it. Sometimes I couldn't see it. But today, on the way in, it was amazing because I looked up at the clouds and I saw the Tree of Life. And then I arrived here and I saw the beautiful exhibition. So she is definitely here with us. And I loved having her in my life, and I miss her.
Well, I remember I've been with Eve, I'm going to probably start crying, but almost 10 years. And I remember getting the phone call from Home Instead asking if I would like a new client. But I had to enjoy shopping, going out to lunch, love animals, and just being a companion. And I thought, yeah, I think I can do this. So the first time I went to meet Eve, oh my gosh, she had 2 cats and a dog. And they all came to the door, and I picked up little Rusty at the time, and she goes, "I know you're going to like it here, Sue." So anyway, over the years, I'm more of an upbeat person, so I can't really do a lot of the spiritual things that you all are listening to, even though I do have a kind heart and do believe in the Spirit. But Eve, oh my gosh, I learned she opened my eyes to thrift stores. She opened my eyes to reading labels on all the food, and she opened my eyes into just what a kind and caring person she was. I probably know more about her grandkids in the past, about Rachel's when she was kind of a youngster, and I know. I had gone to college here from 70 to 74, so it was, as I lived in Illinois, but I came here to school. And the other thing with Eve is she always would call me about the animals, and I'll never forget, it was 5 in the morning one morning. She said, "Sue, I think Ollie passed away." And I said, "Oh my gosh." I said, "Okay, I'll be right over." So I did, and sure enough, he had expired. But nothing was really open, and so I said, okay, let me go home and shower, and I'll come back at 7, and we can go to the vet. So I came over, and of course, I don't do really well when I see, animals that have passed. But my adrenaline kicked in, and I took it to the vet. She didn't want to go with me. And then that afternoon, I came over to check on her, and lo and behold, that darn cat little bear had brought in a snake. And I said, Eve, I cannot go looking for this snake. I won't do that. And so it kind of climbed underneath the water heater. And I think Tom came over and got that, because I was not going to do that. And the only other memory that I really had with Eve was one time we were at King Soopers, and we had a blast when we'd go shopping, and we were laughing so much we both got in the car and we left our purses in the grocery carts. And we drove off, and I said, oh my gosh, Eve. And luckily we went back, it was still in the parking lot. So Eve to me was more like a friend than somebody trying to take care of her. And I think another thing besides missing Eve is I'm going to miss her family, because I've kind of grown over all those years to kind of, I saw Leah in a Christmas musical concert. I learned to know what everyone's interests were with the kids. So I hope we stay in touch over the years, and I thank you for letting me take care of her for all that time. So I'll miss you, Eve.
Well, I'm sure none of you would be surprised, but when Eve was 83 years old, she went to her doctor, Dr. Eckstein, and said, I think I need some help with my memory. Who can I see? Most people are saying, well, this is part of life. She said, no, I really want to work on this. And so that was when I met her. I went to her house and did some memory therapy, cognitive therapy. We worked on all kinds of things. And she wanted me to push her. She did not want anything easy. If I did something a little bit easier, she knew it and she didn't like it. She wanted me to really push her. And as our relationship developed, I started helping her with her book. And the latest book she was writing was one in which she wanted to compare Obama with Jesus. And that was so typical of it. Like she wanted rewriting the Bible. Yeah, just like you had said that she's rewriting the Bible, she also wanted to bring out that Obama and Jesus have so much in common. She loved Obama. As we started working more and more and started working on her book too and looking at how she's writing her book, she wanted to go out to lunch because that was one of her most creative. I think somebody talked about how much she loved her food, and she became very creative, and we did so much at the restaurant. And she got to the point when I would arrive, she'd say, oh boy, let's go get in trouble. And that meant we're going to go on an outing. And we went to the restaurants, but we also went to the thrift stores. We also went to the bookstores, both the Barnes & Noble and the used bookstores, and we always found the book sections of every thrift store in town and over in Louisville, Lafayette, as we went further and further. And we spent so much time also talking, like Tina talked about. She was so concerned about the Syrian refugees and how similar their experience was to hers as a child. And she talked about her violin students, how much she loved her violin students. And she talked about individual ones or just, as a group, how much she loved teaching. She talked about her music and her art and her writing. Because we're looking at Jesus and Obama, we got into a lot of the spirituality too. And she also talked so much about her family and her love for her family, She loved being a mother. She loved being a grandmother, and that was so important to her. When she and I would go out, one thing that I noticed is how much she would transform total strangers. Somebody at the restaurant, somebody at the grocery store, somebody on the street. I mean, people would come up to us and want to talk to her. They saw something in her. She just had that presence, and she would transform people. It was just so incredible. And I was very fortunate to be able to be the one with her on the last outing that she took. She had been sick for a while. Rachel had come to visit, and she was starting to feel better, and we were all saying, "Oh, this is great." And I arrived, and she said, "Let's go get roast beef at Lucky's." She loved getting the potato and roast beef at Lucky's. And I was saying, "No, why don't you let me go get it?" No, she wanted to go. And so we compromised. I told her, "Okay, we'll drive over there, but if you aren't feeling well, then I'll go in." We get there, and like you said, she had so much energy. That was always Eve. She said, "Nope, I'm going to go in with you." So we not only did that, then we went grocery shopping, then we went to the bakery and got a cupcake, then we went to the liquor store to get her blessed wine that she loved so much. And each place there was somebody who just really resonated with her. Complete strangers. The man at the liquor store stood with her and talked to her while I went and got the car. He had other patrons there, but yet he was willing to do that. And he did not leave her side until I got there. When we were in the grocery store, there was a man there waiting to get some bread, and I realized it, and I apologized and said, "Let us get out of your way." And he said, "Oh, no, the bread can wait. I'll just be hungrier, and it'll taste better when we finish." And then he asked a little bit about her and talked to her a little bit. We went and got in line. He came right behind us in line. And when we checked out, he said, "Wait a minute, I'm paying for that. I'm paying forward." And I turned to him. I said, "Eve, did you hear that?" And she turned and thanked him. And I said, "Thank you so much." And he said, "I believe in honoring our elders, and I can tell she's a very wise, kind elder." And it was very, very touching. And when we got to the car, she said, "I'm never going to go anyplace else to shop. This is the best place." I am just so grateful to have gotten to know Eve. I considered her a very, very close friend. And once again, I didn't know her as long as Tina even, but it was, I think, about 3 years. And she transformed me as she transformed so many people. I also would like to say that she was definitely a gift from God. Thank you.
I wanted to start with a poem by Rumi, who's a 13th century Persian mystic. It's called The Guest House. Can you hear me? Okay. This being human is a guest house every morning with a new arrival. A joy, a depression, a meanness, some momentary awareness comes as an unexpected visitor. Welcome and entertain them all, even if they're a crowd of sorrows who violently sweep your house empty of its furniture. Still, treat each guest honorably. He may be clearing you out for some new delight. The dark thought, the shame, the malice, meet them at the door laughing and invite them in. Be grateful for whoever comes, because each has been sent as a guide from beyond. That's how Eve was. She accepted whatever came. She wasn't always happy about it, but she never let it defeat her. I'm a little confused about what to do with this. What Eve's life showed me, I was with her for about 4 years. And besides being a caregiver, I was the person who took up the mantle, if it were, of helping her publish her last 2 books. So I got to know her life fairly well through her books and her early childhood, which she talked about some, but not a whole lot. But it was there quite strongly in the books, and it was there quite strongly in the paintings. So I have felt so strongly her life to be one of acceptance and transformation and transcendence. Her early years were by no stretch of the imagination easy. They were very painful and difficult. She could feel from the very beginning of her life she was unloved and unwanted. She came to believe she was stupid and uncreative and ugly, which we all know is not true. And love came so difficultly to her so many times in her life. The love that someone showed her was quickly taken. Her opa killed himself. Her teacher she could no longer see because of Kristallnacht, and she was Jewish and she could no longer go to school. She loved school. Her nurse, her maid, who was the one who really took care of her when her mother could not, couldn't work for them any longer because she couldn't work for a Jewish family. But love finally came to her so wonderfully with her children. She said, "When I held my children, my heart flew open. I didn't know such love existed." Those are her words. At some point in her life, something just stood up in her and said, "I will be so alive. I will not be governed by this past." And she went into therapy and worked indefatigably. Is that the word you used? And her house is full of that. You can see the transition in her paintings, which were an outgrowth of her therapy, from the sorrow of her childhood to this kind of reconciling. This could happen. This could be okay. To these incredible spiritual beings who she knew and who knew her. She certainly wasn't stupid. If you ever went into her library, you would know. I wrote up a brief list of all the, because we've been going through her books, a brief list of the categories. I had to alphabetize them. Anatomy, architecture, art, autobiographies, Bibles, biology, biographies, children's books, cookbooks, geography, books in German, a lot of books about God, a lot of books in Hebrew, history of anybody, a lot of books about the Holocaust, a lot of books about Jesus, therefore, a lot of books about being Jewish, a lot of books about Mary, a lot of books about Mary Magdalene, a lot of books about music and Obama, psychology, physiology, psychiatry, plays, poetry, spirituality. And my favorite was this little blue book of common Latin expressions. So she was one of the smartest people I knew. And I know some smart people. And she was funny. And if you take a look at that picture of her at the top of the page, you just have to look into those eyes and look at that smile to know what a beauty she was. So, thank you, Eve.
Thank you all so much, and thanks to all the caregivers who helped us so much. A few months ago, I learned about the Threshold Singers, a group who give the tremendous gifts of singing for those that are seriously ill or at the end of their lives, a time of deeply intense feelings when words are often inadequate. We all know that music has the power to reach people on a very deep level, as is Rainey's incredibly beautiful cello music. When I called to ask the Threshold Singers to come sing for Eve over the last few months, I knew how meaningful that would be to her. So at that time, we had a group of 3. Patty, Mary, and Sally came to Eve's house, and they actually came twice. The Threshold Singers in small groups, it's a nationwide movement, I guess you'd call it. In small groups, they communicate love and kindness with their gentle voices, and they bring comfort with a calm and focused presence. They offer simple a cappella repeating melodies with very meaningful words in a soothing, calming way. The songs were written specifically for this purpose. They're soft, short, and repetitious. Eve and I were so touched by their gift that I have asked them to come and sing 2 of the short songs, which were particularly powerful and moving and soothing to Eve over her last couple of months.
I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. I am home, I am safe, I am loved. May peace be with you. Peace be with you now. May peace be with you always. Peace be with you.
Thank you all so very, very much. Next, my husband Steve is going to share a few words.
I wrote a few things down. However, I probably won't follow the script. So much has been said of Eve already. We've got a very good idea who she was and how much she meant to everybody. I've known her for probably 45 years. I was 15 or 16 when I first met her. And since that time, I grew a lot, but Eve also grew tremendously. And she is a person who just loved life and loved to learn. A lot of her passion came out of injury and loneliness. It's incredible to me to think of a family who had to move from Nazi Germany because of fear and persecution and come to America and do so well. And so grateful for her family and Rainey, for her talent, for sharing that gift with us today. But Eve was a complex person, and she wore her emotions on her sleeve. So you knew when she was happy, when she was sad, when she was upset with you, or agreed with you or didn't agree with you. But she was an honest person, though. And her gifts were many, but her pursuits were great. Music and violin and piano, her writings, her books. Her first book, about Dot and Life, was about life from conception on. When I went through that, I thought, I had less training about conception in medical school than she wrote in that book. And it's amazing. She was dedicated to research and trying to find out science and fact. And her library was extensive. I mean, I don't know many physicians who have neuroscience books in their office or library, but Eve had them in her office because she did the research. But she truly was a person of passion. One of her greatest accomplishments was her family, though. Her 3 children, Debbie, Rachel, and Seth. And what you guys meant to her, and her grandchildren, too. Excuse me. So Eve, because of her sorrows early in life, she was so passionate in giving people joy. And I truly think that the last 5 years of her life, to me, were the 5 happiest years I knew her in the 45 years that we shared together. And a lot of it is because of her family, her physicians, doctors, her caregivers, and other professionals. It really takes a community, I think, to uplift people. And everybody here has done that. And the results are tremendous. When I look back at Eve, there's 2 things that I look at that I want to emulate. And one is she was resilient. And we all have sorrows and loneliness and depression, and we get through that. But she did not let it defeat her. And she always came through those times. And her moments of exhilaration were tremendous. And many times, 24 hours a day, she'd be calling Debbie in the day or at nighttime to go over some new idea or something she was researching. And I'll miss those times, maybe not the 2 a.m. phone calls, but much of the times. But Eve was passionate, and her love of learning was tremendous. And I think we share that together. And so she would research everything, history and biology and just physics and psychology, psychiatry, spirituality, just tremendous volumes of work. So I look back at Eve, she was very complex, but very special person. But again, very resilient, and her love of life and learning was tremendous. And I'll always take that with me. Thanks.
My daughter Leah, one of her grandchildren.
I did not know my grandma that well up until about 2 years ago, when we started spending lots of time together. We went shopping at thrift stores. That's where I learned my love of thrifting. We drew a lot together. We drew a lot of clouds together. She loved clouds. And we had so many wonderful conversations. We talked about our lives, our experiences, and her admiration for nature and art, and her perseverance for never giving up. We even spent one afternoon discussing sacred geometry for a few hours. We have learned so much from each other, and I feel extremely fortunate to be as close with my grandmother as I was. I saw the most beautiful side of my Omi. She was so curious and always had a thirst to learn more about anything and everything. Thankfully, 2 years ago, Omi started assisted care. There were so many wonderful, positive people in my grandmother's life. It may have even been the best 2 years of her life. I will always cherish our wonderful times together. Thank you so much for teaching me the true meaning of forgiveness and self-love. I love you so much, and I feel your presence with me every day, especially when I drive. And she was just one of the most amazing people that I've ever known. And I'm so looking out here, I'm just so thankful for all of you to be here, because through her life, how she felt so alone, and then the last few years, she really felt so loved and comforted by so many. And to look around this room and see all these beautiful faces, it really means so much to me and my family and everyone here. So thank you for being here, and thank you for knowing such an amazing woman. I love you, Omi.
Before we conclude our memorial with words from Eve's children, Seth and Rachel and myself, Rainey is going to play another piece called The Swan by Saint-Saëns. Thank you, Rainey. That was beautiful. my brother Seth, followed by my sister Rachel, and then I will say a few words to conclude.
Thanks for being here. About half my speech was better covered by everybody else here, so I'll just continue with the driving stories and Omi. When I was a kid, she made up this game about license plates. As we drove around, she'd take the digits of the plate in front of us and add the two digits together. So if the number was 1276, she'd add 12 plus 76, and that would total 88. And the object of the game, the highlight, was when the numbers happened to add up to 100. So 1276 was nothing much, but 1288, now that was nice. And how many hours did we drive around to Saxel's Books or Kmart or Duckwall's adding up license plates? And what wonderful hours those were. Once I saw a plate with 50-50, and I was excited to point that out to her. She wasn't impressed. Too easy, she said. She had a crazy sense of humor. When I was in high school, I leaned over a rail by a creek with some books on the rail, and a moment later the books were in the water. And I, shamefaced, I brought them home. They were soggy. Told her the school was going to charge us for water damage. Water damage, she laughed. It struck her as the most hilarious phrase in the language. Water damage, she repeated, laughing and laughing and laughing. I thought I'd discovered the holy grail of comedy, water damage. Who else but Eve would find such crazy humor in it? It was a joke we shared for decades, even in her last month. She was funny, she was welcoming, curious, persistent, kind. As I think back on our conversations, I hear her ask, why not try it this way? Maybe you forgot about that. Have you thought about this? She was always looking for a better solution, always exploring the possible. This is Eve's viola. And a few days after she died, a little tune occurred to me. And sometimes when I play it, I just feel like a bit of communication with her spirit. So I thought I'd try it here today, and it's called The Possible.
Hi, everyone. A lot of this has been covered, but I'll go through some of it and then get to my unique memories and so forth about Eve. About 2 years ago, when my dad's service took place, my mom was sitting right next to me, and I just wish she was here again. Anyway, my mom was a survivor. Her family survived the Holocaust, and she survived many other challenges in her life. her marriage being one of them. At age 70, when most couples are settling into their final years together, they got divorced and she started her life anew. She had the courage to sell her house, buy a new one, and start all over again. She'd never dealt with finances or any of that stuff, and she was living on a meager pension that didn't go too far. But she was extremely resourceful, and she figured it all out. She even took out a reverse mortgage and set up her new life because she was determined to do that on her terms. And in her new house, she set up it just the way she wanted. She had different rooms for all her different passions. She had one room for her art, one room for her music, one where she did her writing, and this library that we've all heard about where she collected her books and did her reading. And we saw in one of the slides in her backyard, she even set up a basketball hoop because she was into that for a while too. And she had that beautiful circular stone garden in the backyard where the little animals would prance around and everyone was just very happy. You've heard a lot about my mom's insatiable intellect. She never wasted one moment soaking everything up that she possibly could. She never was bored, and she was so grateful for her life. She was always, even in spite of all the challenges, she just loved her life so much. You know, she was not the most accomplished musician or writer, but to her it didn't matter because she used her creativity as a form of therapy and worked through her sadnesses and her challenges and always to satiate her inquisitive mind. She also assembled a team she could talk to, Jackie and her wonderful caregivers. And Team Eve was her lifeline. And I thank everyone on Team Eve for everything you've done for Eve over the years. She taught me never to be ashamed to surround yourself with people you need, meds you might need to take. They're all there to be there to help you and support you. During her 85th birthday celebration, that's where she announced her plans to rewrite the Bible, which of course was just a minor undertaking. But of course that was Mom. But as a mom, because we had the most amazing relationship and I couldn't have asked for anyone more special than my mom. She was like the most approachable, compassionate, and sensitive mom in the world. And I had a really strong bond with her from a very early age. I had several bouts of separation anxiety going into kindergarten and 7th grade. I couldn't deal being at school without her. I had this bond and I wanted to be with her all the time. And she helped me get through those difficult periods. We were one. I could feel her pain when she was depressed, and she could feel mine. As I continued into my teenage years, many of my childhood friends here will remember I was not the best, most well-behaved child, and found myself getting into quite a bit of trouble here growing up in Boulder, Colorado. But no matter what I had done, she was always the first one I would go to spill my guts. After a Saturday night summer dance at the Boulder Res, I had done something in particular that I'm not going to repeat here. but I knew it was wrong, and I had trouble containing my guilt the next day. She noticed that I was following her around a lot, the house, and realized that there was something I had to talk about. So we went shopping and we talked, and being the passionate, inquisitive mom that she was, she would ask, "What was it like?" rather than, "How dare you?" She helped me get through those years, and I couldn't have done it without her. She set the example for the kind of mom I wanted to be, and I try to be for my kids, Jackson and Gabby. They always can come to me and talk to me about anything with no judgment whatsoever. And I feel that the strong bond that I have with my mom is always going to be there beyond her death into her afterlife. And I'm sure she's having quite the afterlife. She's prancing around up in the clouds, running along the beach, picking up her shells, and doing everything that she loves to do. I'm going to miss her so much, but I know that she's okay. I love you forever, Mom.
Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Seth. Eve truly had an extraordinary life. She would say often that her early years in Nazi Germany during the Holocaust were deeply marked by trauma and terror, a very difficult way for her to start her life. When Eve was 11, her family was fortunate to be able to immigrate to the United States. They arrived in Milwaukee, where Eve started in an American school, not knowing any English. She told me that the teacher handed her a Popular Mechanics magazine, and that is how she began to learn English. Her family, her parents, Eve, her two sisters, Rainey and Kathy, moved to Pittsburgh, where the girls grew up. The words next to Eve's high school senior picture were, "Kind and friendly, the days are much too short for Eva." Eve attended and graduated from the University of Pittsburgh and met her husband, Sid Geltman. They lived for several years in the Washington, D.C. area, where the three of us were born. Eve was an early pioneer in natural childbirth, going against the norm of the day, refusing to yield to what most were doing at that time in labor and childbirth. When I had my first child, Nathan, she gave me her original, well-worn natural childbirth book with a page marked for me to focus on during labor. When our family moved to Boulder in 1961, our home was always filled with classical music and Eve's many, many violin students. She taught and wrote about violin technique and teaching methods, including the book, The Gift of Music. Eve and Sid divorced in 1996, and she then changed her name to Eve Bat Shalom, meaning daughter of peace in Hebrew, intensely determined to live with peace and to teach and model reparative relationships. She moved to the home here in Boulder, where she would live very fully for the next 20 years, filling her days with art, music, writing, and more pursuits and activities than imaginable. For a time, Eve was a paraprofessional at Eisenhower and Horizon Elementary schools, helping children learn to read and creatively working with those having learning challenges. She also volunteered in the late 90s with I Have a Dream Foundation, being paired with a number of children who had traumas in their lives. She so wished for every baby and child to be loved. She had a heart for anyone that was struggling with anything at all. When I think of the many qualities that made Eve, Eve, I think of the words by Pablo Casals that I read at her 80th birthday. "You are a marvel. You are unique. In all the years that have passed, there's never been another like you. Your legs, your arms, your clever fingers, your brain, the way you move. You may become a Shakespeare, a Michelangelo, a Beethoven. You have the capacity for anything, Yes, you are a marvel. Every inch of Eve's home showed her love of learning and her creativity, packed with books and treasures from the thrift and bookstores she so loved. Her own hundreds of pieces of art adorned every bit of wall space. Multiple beads and flowers hung from the shower, light fixtures decorated with ribbons and more beads and flowers, a jigsaw puzzle floor, glistening shapes on the windows, her yard full of colorful art, along with her mailbox she painted bright red one day, and her three-wheel bike and a basketball hoop, which she regularly used until she was no longer able. Eve was a relentless, lifelong learner with unquenchable curiosity, determined to be understood, to understand herself and others, to understand her life and life's many mysteries. She was a voracious reader. She did extensive studying and research on anything she became interested in, whether it was neuroscience, fetal development, anatomy, prenatal and child attachment and trauma, patterns of nature, sacred geometry, musical technique, great religions and philosophies, the writings of Jung and Buber, world cultures, and much more. She also learned Hebrew when she was nearly 70 years old. Through her art and her writing, she always searched for her truths, yearned to understand, process, and express her life's joys and struggles, allowing her to experience self-discovery, humility, compassion, resiliency, and determination to overcome tremendous difficulties throughout her life. Writing in the last few years, the books From This Incredible Dot and With Love Not Met. Eve was never bored, never idle, and never a dull moment, and I know how I got that quality. She was always busy doing any number of simultaneous things, practicing her piano and violin for hours each day, writing, studying many topics, doing her art, doing cognitive exercises, walking her beloved dog around her neighborhood, and on and on. She didn't need much sleep normally and would go late into the night. She made the most of every moment she was given. She took on lofty goals and very large projects. Most of us would find insurmountable and would never even attempt. She wrote huge manuscripts, too many to list. She painted very large canvases using various media. She made many clay sculptures. She always took on the most difficult of musical pieces. She felt most energized and engaged in her life when she determined to tackle something new, be it a new musical piece, a book she wanted to write, or overcoming a historical experience she felt haunted by. A couple of years ago, as has been mentioned, she decided she would rewrite the entire Bible with the hopes of depicting God as always gentle and loving and never showing the side of judgment or anger. She had also, as was mentioned, started writing about the great similarities she believed existed between Barack Obama and Jesus. Unfortunately, she was not able to finish those two projects. Eve wished to impact others in meaningful ways, which she certainly did. Even those who barely knew her would say what a tremendous and profound impact she had on their life. She was intrigued with all religions and expressions of spirituality and would talk about this at any opportunity with anyone at all. She found enormous meaning in the ways she saw God in her life through beauty and patterns in nature she saw all around her. The geometry of a flower through the symmetry and designs, the seasons, new life, cloud formations, the ocean, seashells, colors of nature and landscape. That sense of order repeatedly convinced her that there was a loving God and great meaning to life. She was certain that God had a plan for her life after death, and she had a strong sense that those she loved would always be with her, that there was a sense of permanence, never to leave them or say goodbye. I actually came across something very recently that she had written to her family, and it said, "I feel that I will always be with you." Peace and shalom and the sacred, the words and what they meant were paramount to her. She always longed for good communication, that conflict would be resolved, uniting would happen in relationships and throughout the countries of the world. Just one example, she had the idea that each mother who has a son be given a pen pal in Iraq or Iran, share details of their lives so that neither one would ever want their son to kill the other. Eve became passionate about the concept of eldering and aging, that it was a dynamic and positive time of life. She didn't like how she saw elders treated sometimes. When someone would address a question to me instead of to her, she would speak right up and say, "You can talk directly to me, please." Many times she said that she felt the same as she did when she was younger, and she even said to me a few months before she died, "I wonder what it's like to be old." Her dash, that line between 1928, the year she was born, and 2016, the year she died, was packed full. What others have said about Eve include the following. She was a legend, a major force, radiant with spirituality. She was a kind and gentle soul, gave so much to others. We will miss her caring presence on this earth. She was so important to me throughout my life. I hold her securely and deeply inside of me. As she found peace, she was successful. I was deeply touched by her life story and all that shaped and buffeted her on her long journey, all the joys and sorrows. An extraordinary life well lived. She was engaged, courageous, intense, and fascinating. As my violin teacher, she was always patient and kind and had me strive to work my hardest and do my best. She was an inspiration to me, gave me hope, and she left a lasting impression. She was a remarkable woman, one we could all befriend and look up to. What a zest and passion she had for a positive, contributory life. Oh, how I would have loved to have known your mother. I would have loved to have sat and listened as her ideas and thoughts flowed freely and genuinely, and to have learned from her to play the violin and the piano. I would have loved to have held her beloved animals. I miss her sweetness and caring about me and my kids. She always wanted to turn adversity into new opportunities for growth. Eve told me she was concerned about forgetting things one day, so she decided to start studying algebra. Her passionate drive to delve into new knowledge, her curiosity and creativity were irrepressible, as was her gratitude for having lived long enough to become more than a Holocaust survivor. We all just get a limited amount of time before we step aside. I'm glad she used hers well. I have been expanded and changed by knowing her. She was so kind and warm to everyone she came in contact with. Whether it was a helper to her, a store clerk, or a friend of mine, Eve treated everyone the same, regardless of what they could do for her, their status in life. She knew everyone in her path was special and had a unique story. She will live on in all of you. Your mom will be with you forever. Her traits and her legacy will be carried on for many generations. An artist, writer, musician, and a great lover of humanity. She had a life of great troubles and was able to find a way to shine light in the darkness and have tremendous gratitude for her life. With a hard life, it takes hard and persistent grit, determination, hard work to get through life and even turn it around to be grateful, fulfilled, and find great meaning. Those were just a few things that have been shared with me over the last 5 weeks since she died. Eve would want to encourage anyone she possibly could to get help with depression. Much of her life, the first 60 years in fact, was dominated by sadness, despair, and feeling empty and invisible, largely stemming from her numerous childhood traumas and times of abandonment. She worked relentlessly and without stopping for the past 25 years as she experienced the transformational power of treatment, which she believed for her was life-restoring, life-giving, and actually life-saving. She was fiercely determined throughout her life in every way, with every obstacle at every turn. She would say in the last few years that she loved her life and was grateful for every day she had to experience. She wrote volumes about all of this. She painted and sculpted about it and saw the insights and capacity she gained as being responsible for her ability to feel alive and to begin to appreciate life. Eve desperately wanted her efforts to have intergenerational meaning. She often said that her greatest joy, loves, and accomplishment were her 3 children, and that her greatest regret and sadness was that she was not able to be the mother she wished she would have been, due to the disabling depression that dominated her life. She often said that her feelings of darkness and insignificance did not allow her to love or to be the mother she wanted to be. But when she said that, I would reassure her that the resilience and unconditional love she always showed us far outweighed anything else. She modeled for us so much: to love, to care, to be resilient, compassionate, kind, independent, sensitive, and so much more. I'm struck by the significance of the 3 names she had in her life and all that each name represented. From birth to 25, she was Eva Ernestine Schall. From age 25 to 68, she was Eva Geltman. From ages 68 on, she was Eve Bat Shalom. Looking at Eve's hands during what ended up being her last few days, I reflected on all those hands had done. Holding her beloved doll Judith as a young girl, covering her ears in fear at the yelling of the nearby Gestapo German soldiers, swinging her hands back and forth as she ran to escape, having to leave her beloved doll behind. After much research, she was able to get one very similar 50 years later. I thought of those hands holding her 3 babies and her 6 grandchildren with great joy. Those hands creating art in so many forms, lots and lots of writing, tapping her typewriter keys, turning hundreds of thousands of pages of books she read throughout her life, always writing notes in the margins and underlining important passages. Playing the piano, the violin, as well as other instruments, always making detailed notes in her music. Creating programs for her many recitals, planting flowers in her yards, writing letters to the editor, browsing through lots of treasures at thrift stores, eating her unique diet, and hugging her family and friends. Those hands were through a lot in those 87 years. There are times in our lives when we are totally dependent, early in our lives and at the end of our lives. Eve was for years very vocal, very clear, and absolutely adamant about her intention to stay and age in her own home and to die there naturally. I am so grateful that we were able to honor that very strong desire of hers. She would say in her last month that she felt lazy, as she was so used to not needing much sleep and always going. I tried to reassure her at those times that the rest and the quiet was the most important work she could be doing right then. She always seemed to overcome whatever stood in her way, and we really thought she would rebound, as she always did, even at the end, as she showed renewed strength just a few days before she died. I was able to be with her on her last breath as she was with me on my first breath. As she lived her life on her own terms, so it was with her death. I was privileged to walk alongside her the past couple years when she so needed help. I would not and could not have had it any other way. During this time, we had interaction with many doctors, other medical professionals, caregivers, so many people, and they were all touched by Eve, and she always told each of them how grateful she was. They made such a profound difference, and a real difference in the quality of what ended up being her last months and years. She said to me very recently, "I always felt like such an insignificant dot with only darkness. Now I feel sacred and peaceful. I'm full of light and love, and I'm grateful for my life." She was one of a kind, very unique. She composed her life, surrounded herself with special and significant people. She endured numerous traumas, always fiercely determined against great odds to find ways to cope, survive, and thrive. Eve gave me the lifelong gifts, including her final gifts, of compassion, determination, love, resilience, to be myself, to push forward no matter how difficult or insurmountable anything may seem. From Eve's favorite song by Rodgers and Hammerstein, walk on, with hope in your heart, and you'll never walk alone. And from the book of Numbers, may God bless you and keep you. May God make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. May God turn his face toward you and give you peace. Our mother Eve is at peace. She was truly a person full of love, creativity, compassion, kindness, gratitude, searching, discovery, and peace. Life will not ever be the same without her. Thank you all so very, very much for sharing this time with us. It means a great deal to us. Please stay with us, and we have some refreshments, and we'd love to visit with you here on the north side, and then we'd love to have you come to Eve's from 4:30 to 5:30 to see her art and hopefully take some of her art in her books. Thank you all very, very much.
Closer.